more. That actually really brings us to a good point. The world is in trouble. When I say the world, I'm talking about civilization, our way of life, the whole planet. When we say, it's been said that we have two great threats. One is war, nuclear weapons, weapons of mass destruction. These are the quick way of degrading society. The slow way, of course, is environmental collapse. Environmental collapse is global warming, clearing of the rainforests, the oceans collapsing. Right now we're going through the greatest extinction that we've had since the dinosaurs, 65 million years ago. So we are threatened with these two things, war, environmental problems. We have other problems as well, obviously. But when we look at how do we eliminate these, first I want to talk about war and peace, and then I'll talk about justice, and then I'll talk about the environment. War and peace, we look at examples. Where's places that war has existed and now are peaceful? And I think the best example that we can see in our own time of that is the European Union and in Europe. You had Europe, which has been at war for thousands and thousands of years, 2 world wars, continuous warfare really for as long as we can remember. Now we have peace in Europe among the countries of the European Union are not fighting each other. We don't worry about Germany and France going to war. We don't worry about England going to war with them because they now settle their disputes through law. They settle it in a court of law through the Parliament, the European Parliament, or a court system. This is the principle. We see this in other areas too. You see this in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, the Catholics and the Protestants were fighting for years. How did that get resolved? The people, the IRA, those people are actually members of the Parliament. So they've moved from a system of force, from bullets to ballots. And that's the idea that if you want to see peace in the world, you have to move to a system of law. Law is the basis of civilization. Law is the purpose of law is to protect people. That's the very purpose of law, and it is what makes us civilized. Unfortunately, we've not had law go to the global level. We do have what's called international law, and that's the UN, and that's treaty law, and that's better than no rules at all. The way it used to be, there was no rules, no norms, and international law has done great things, and the UN is the greatest peace and justice organization in the world. So I don't want to say, oh, it's a bad thing. The UN, no, it's done great things. It's saved millions of people's lives. But the UN has not fulfilled its real mission, which is to end the scourge of war. The way that can be done is by changing the structure of the UN. First of all, the UN is not democratic. You have Iceland, less than 1 million people, has the same vote in the General Assembly as China with over 1 billion people. There's real democracy discrepancies. You have a veto power. The 5 countries that won World War II, those are China, the United States, Russia, Great Britain, and France, have veto power. It really has made the United Nations very non-functional in a lot of ways. Now we have an international community. We're globally connected. We have the internet, we have television, we have all this communication. We're really connected together, and the precursor of government is community. First you have to have a community, then you develop rules for that community, and eventually you codify them in government with enforceability. We're evolving. Socially we're evolving just like our social evolution. We've eliminated slavery. In the last 150 years ago, slavery was abolished by changing the law. It was a movement of ordinary people that did that. Same with women's rights, same with rights to organize for unions. All these different things have been eliminated over time, and the reason that they've been eliminated is that people have demanded them, and so we become more civilized. We no longer accept slavery. We no longer accept child labor. These things are banned, and so the idea is that war can be banned as well by the power of law. Now, we're currently in a system of nation states. And the nation state, our allegiance, we do the Pledge of Allegiance, or you think of, where's my allegiance to? Well, it's to your nation state. And unfortunately, when countries go to the United Nations, that's where their allegiance is. It's not to the UN, it's not to the global community. Their allegiance is to their country, so they go to represent themselves, speak for their country, but they're not representing all of humanity. So the idea is, I'll talk a little bit about justice now. Justice, the idea of democracy is that democracy means people. Demo is people, and it means people power. People make the decision. There has been a move since the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Enlightenment, that the idea of being ruled by kings, being ruled by monarchies, that is virtually disappeared. There's only a few monarchies that actually rule left in the world. There's still dictatorships that are not democratic, but over half the people in the world now live under a democracy. China is not a democracy. Russia is not a democracy. They have gone from communist to capitalist, but they have not gone to democracy. There's still many places, the Middle East, there's not democracies there. So if you look around the world where the democracies are, you'll see really where the peaceful countries of the world are. Western Europe, New Zealand, Australia, India is a democracy. There's different levels, of course, of democracy. There's no perfect democracy. The United States is not a perfect democracy. But the goal really is to have, what's that? Far from. Yes, I agree with that. It's not a perfect democracy, but it is better than having anarchy. And that's really what we have at the global level. If you look at Europe, and you look at, they have a standard. To become a member of the European Union, they vote for accession. And they have to meet a certain human rights standard. They have to change some of their laws to meet that standard. So it's that idea that you attract democracies, not forcing a country to be a democracy, but you attract them to democracy, and that spreads. And that's the idea of justice. You're always, I think it was Thomas Jefferson said, it's the vigilance of the people that create a democracy. Just because you have a constitution that says it's fair, that doesn't mean you have a democracy. You have to have the people always have to be participating like we are today. And I think that the title of this program, which is Another World is Possible, Another System is Necessary, really goes with what we're trying to promote. We have a blueprint, an architect blueprint to say, we want peace in the world, we want environmental justice, we want democracy, we want justice. We have a plan to do that, to actually deliver that. We're trying to build a much bigger movement so that we have a political voice. Our voice right now is very small. Our greatest accomplishment was the International Criminal Court. That's a great thing. I mean, to hold heads of state accountable for genocide is a great thing. But we need to take other steps to move in that direction. And so there is a movement around the world of people that are working for peace, they're working for justice, and they're working to save the environment. We're part of that. It takes a broad coalition of people to do that. The other aspect of it I want to talk about is the environment. Global warming. How do you solve global warming if one country is producing tons of CO2, the other one is producing less, and you're trying to balance it out, and you have to have international rules? You have to have enforceability. And I think that's one thing that if we had enforceability, which is lacking in treaty law at the United Nations, is that we could have a much more powerful response to a global problem. The other thing is, if you look at what's really worked in the environmental movement, what has worked is you have like the national park system. The national park system says, okay, here's some land, we're going to protect this land, we're taking it from private hands to public hands. It will not be developed, it will be held that way. That has worked. You've seen this in the oceans as well. They're taking parts of the ocean and said, this is an ecological preserve, we're not going to have fishing here, we're not going to do anything here, and that's worked because it's held. The idea is to take that to the global level. There's a lot of countries in the developing world that have great resources, the Amazon, Africa. There's places that have animals, rainforests, but they're losing those, and they're losing them quickly. The idea is take the money from the developing world that wants that and create world parks, world sanctuaries in the ocean. And these are supported not just by the local country as a national park, but they're getting resources from the rest of the world. You have kind of that concept in UNESCO, these World Heritage Sites, but it's for culture. It's not for preserving large, vast areas of land. So there's great things that we can do by moving to a different system. The question, of course, is how do you move to that system? Part of it is really activism. If you want to be a political activist, it's a two-step process. And the first step is you educate yourself, and that's what we're doing at this conference here. We're educating ourselves by going to these different events and learning about all these different issues. But there's a second step, and a lot of people fail on that second step. And the second step is you have to open your mouth. You have to either write, you have to speak, or you have to take some action. Maybe you play music, maybe you do art. Whatever it is, you have to put something back out into the world so that you educate somebody else, that you change the discussion. I think we've seen recently in the last few days, we just saw the Supreme Court passed a decision that gay marriage is now legal across the country. And to me, if you look at that, was there really a leader, or was it thousands or millions of people making small efforts here and there that led up to that final decision? And it really was just people, doing a lot of different things that led up to a change in the law, which is what we're really asking for, is a change in the law. We're not asking for anything. People think when we talk about global government, this is a radical idea. It's not a radical idea. We're talking about democracy. We're talking about rule of law. We're talking about a federation, a limited global government. I'm not talking about a big brother, top-down government where it's controlled by someone. No, this is a limited government that only deals with global issues. The idea in a federation, of course, is that you can have different countries be part of a federation and have different laws, just like California and Nevada have different laws. California, gambling is illegal. Nevada, it's legal. And we're part of a federation. We're still states, but we have different laws. Just like in Europe, Germany and France have different laws, but they have a government above them that's enough to keep the peace. You don't want a government that's too strong. There is a risk in having any government that it can become corrupt. And so you want to have limited government, and you always want to have it in check. But if it makes sense to have government at the local level, if it makes sense to have it at the state level, if it makes sense to have it at the national level, why when we get to the global level do people go, oh no, that would be terrible? It makes sense to have government. Government has benefits. There's a risk with government. Government can become tyrannical, but the benefit of having government versus anarchy, to me, is really no question. If you look at countries in anarchy, look at Somalia, there is no central government. You have warring tribes. You look at the Middle East compared to Europe. What do you have in Europe? You have peace because you have a government. What do you have in the Middle East? Warring tribes. Everybody's allegiance is to their tribe. I'm a Sunni, I'm a Shia, I'm a this, I'm a that. That's where their allegiance is. And what we really need is a change in global consciousness where we're bringing people to the idea that my allegiance is to the human race, my allegiance is to the world, my allegiance is to democratic values, my allegiance is to human rights, not to the nation state. I can still love my country, and my country will still exist. The country is not going to disappear, just like England didn't disappear after its empire and became part of the European Union. It's still there. It's still a part of the, the country still exists. It still has its own laws. It's just a member of something else. So when we talk about, Bob was talking about paths to democratic federation. And the paths are many. They can happen a lot of different ways, and I don't know how it's going to happen. Part of this is really social evolution. We're talking about a social evolutionary change that we've gone from being a small little tribe living in the jungle to a city-state, and then a nation-state, and then larger, now a regional government. So we've continually expanded how far government goes and how our rules are. And so this is an evolutionary step that is necessary for our survival. And if we don't take this step, we really are looking at some pretty dire consequences with the nuclear age, with nuclear terrorism, with the global warming, collapse of environment. We really have some dire consequences if we don't address those. So to me, that's the blueprint. And I think we're gonna open it up for some questions and do a discussion. I'm going to turn it back over to Bob, and then we're going to have a discussion.